This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Elan Credit Card. Elan partners with more than 250 credit unions to provide an outsourced credit card program. Welcome to episode 139 of the show. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm excited that you're all here today. This show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. Today, I'm having a conversation with Ricky Otey. Ricky is the president and CEO of Partners Federal Credit Union in Florida and California, I'm pretty sure. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Ricky. It's good to see you again virtually.
Great. Thank you, Randy. It's so nice to be here and be with you and your audience. And I look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it too. We got a chance to know each other a little bit, albeit on a panel that you were on during one of our mini-con events. So for the people that don't know you out there, I'd like to start with just kind of the basics of your story. Where'd that career start? You know, where'd you grow up? And how did that lead you to where you are today in credit unions?
Again, glad to be with you today. Fortunately or unfortunately, I am a 30-year financial services executive. So I've been in this business for a long time. My career started, believe it or not, with First Union National Bank in Charlotte, North Carolina, back in 1989. For those of you who've been around may remember First Union, which became Wachovia, which is now Wells Fargo.
Yeah, you remember that well. Exactly. They kind of built Charlotte, didn't they, First Union?
Exactly. So back in the heydays of the 80s and 90s, so I spent 17 years with Wachovia, most of it on the East Coast, either Charlotte or Virginia, in the retail small business investment part of the company. After 17 years there, I left Wachovia right before the Wells Fargo merger and joined Capital One, which is headquartered out of Richmond, Virginia, Tysons Corner, Virginia, and spent 6 years with Capital One. I actually helped Capital One develop its retail banking strategy. Started in the state of Texas and actually ran retail and business banking and investment banking for Capital One in Texas. Then spent another 3 years after a merger with North Fork, leading the Capital One franchise in the Northeast, so New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And so after that 6 year stint there, I took about a year sabbatical I did some consulting work, started to do some reflecting on what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. And I started to talk to folks in the credit union movement and had not spent a lot of time up until that point in the credit union space. But the more I learned about credit unions and how it competed with community banks and then commercial banks, I really got intrigued. So I had an opportunity with a couple of headhunters to interview for different roles. And I ended up as the chief operating officer with a credit union in Charlotte, North Carolina, Fort Mill, South Carolina, Sharon V. Federal Credit Union. I spent 7 years there as the executive VP and chief operating officer before a year ago now, about 8 months ago, having the opportunity to come to Partners as the new president and CEO. So that's 30 years in about 2 minutes.
There you go. Well, we appreciate that. Boy, I'm trying not to get off track here. I'm so intrigued by your the sabbatical year. I always love to talk about that. So I may circle back to that later, okay. But we'll stick to credit unions for a minute here. By no means, you're no longer new to credit unions. You've been around quite some time. What are you looking forward to most when it comes to our movement? And what are you and your team at Partners working on that has you excited? And then I'd add just kind of a question at the end of this for you. What do you think every credit union should be thinking about today?
Sure. Well, what's got me excited about the credit movement right now, I think it's the same thing that has everyone in financial services excited. And that is this turbulent time we're in around interest rate environment, around the challenge with fintechs and a challenge with technology. But it's really going back to the grassroots of what credit unions are all about. And that's meeting members where they are and helping them to determine how they can be financially successful. The challenge we have in today's environment is that with a plethora of information and technology that's at our fingertips, in a lot of ways it's made life a lot easier, but in a lot of ways it's made life more challenging. So where does the consumer who's worked 15, 20 years at an employer go to get financial retirement advice? Where does that new person starting with a company go to get help with buying their first car or financing education for their children? And so that at its very basic is the grassroots effort of where I think credit unions can be so impactful and so successful. So that's what's got me excited, and which is how do we take the grassroots mission that credit unions are on and couple that with the high-tech technology solutions that are enabling us to be even more relevant in our members' lives. and put those two together to make all of this information and all of this stuff that's flowing at people consumable so that people can digest it and then put it to use for themselves. So that's got me excited. I think credit unions are in a unique space to be able to do that, probably better than some of our commercial bank partners and friends. And the fact that credit unions tend to be more singularly focused on member behavior and member success than worrying about next month's EPS and next month's earnings call. So I think we can be a little bit more focused, a little bit more long game in helping the member be successful. The second part of your question, what should every credit union be thinking about? I think it's this whole idea of how do you continue to be relevant to new and growing and changing member bases. Credit unions were in a lot of cases founded on plant grounds and tied to certain select employer groups. Those walls have become less relevant, and now it's how do I make sure that my goddaughter and my friends really think about credit unions when they're trying to make financial decisions. And I think every credit union ought to be thinking about, hey, what's our value proposition to that person who's getting ready to make whatever that financial decision is?
Over the holiday weekend, I was out on a dive boat, and an older gentleman asked me what I did, that type of thing. And I started talking about work with credit unions, and he was like, I've belonged to my credit union for 30 years. He's like, I don't know why more people don't. I'm like, I'm with you, man. But it was, you love when you find a member out there who's like, my kids are now members of mine and all that. And he's moved and all, so it was a beautiful thing always to hear that. I had a question for you that I added just this morning, actually, but I was thinking about it. And like you mentioned your time at, Sharon View before you came over and took the CEO chair at, Partners, and even the history in banking. Were there mentors along the way? Because you took some different tracks in there, right? That really helped you, maybe guide you to where you are today. As you know, before you were the CEO, there's probably a lot of folks out there listening who someday would like to sit in a chair like yours. Maybe not your chair, but a chair like yours, right? Anything that you could speak on in that as far as like mentoring or people that helped you get to where you are?
Absolutely. I always encourage folks to have a personal board of directors, which I have myself. Those folks who will tell you the things about yourself that you don't necessarily want to hear. And I've had pretty much the same 5 or 6 guys on my personal board of directors probably for the last 20 years. And there are folks that I can go to and say, I'm considering this. What do you think about it? They'll tell you very quickly, hey, that doesn't fit with your personality, or that doesn't align with where you've said you want to go personally. And so I really encourage that. I've had mentors that have spoken into my life and into my career that have been all the difference in the world. And so part of my commitment in giving back is I mentor people today myself to do the exact same thing for them.
So let me talk to you, if you don't mind. Can I dig into the personal board of directors a little bit? Are this group of guys, are they in financial services, outside of it, a combination of both? Just like people that you've met over life?
A combination of both. One particular person was a former manager that I worked with probably 20 years ago. I'd actually worked with him twice at 2 different companies. So he's one person that's on my personal board of directors. Another gentleman is someone that I hired and actually used, that he actually worked for me, and he was a credit manager for me for a number of years. We haven't worked together for 15 years, but I still reach out to him and ask questions. I'll never forget, I'll give you a quick side note. I was trying to make a career decision when I was actually contemplating leaving Wachovia. And I met with him and I said, hey, I'm at an impasse. My manager and I are at an impasse. I think my career should go left, and he thinks my career should go right. And he gave me a very sage piece of advice. He said, Ricky, when you get to the points that you and your boss don't agree, you're wrong. And it's time for you to look for something else to do. And I'm like, wow. He says, it's just that simple. So it was very enlightening for me. But no, I would encourage your personal board of directors to be folks outside of your industry. I do have folks that serve that, because I think in the financial services, if you walk in the forest, you only see the trees you're used to seeing. So you need to have folks that are outside of your industry, outside of your business, that see things differently than you do.
So a question for you, and I heard this on another podcast, so it's one of these that I had to steal, but it was this idea, and I I love the question because it's so much of what I do here is just pick people's brains who I think are smart. So I appreciate you being here. But the idea was, like we all pick up those kind of life hacks and things like that along the way. And the question that I heard was like, what was that greatest investment that maybe you made in your career when you think back on it? The example on that podcast was of Warren Buffett saying it was Dale Carnegie courses, So has there been an investment that when you think back on your career, you're like, boy, that was helpful,
That's a great question. And I can think of two specifically, and this is going to sound crazy, but I can think of two specifically that stand out in my career. Early on in my career at Wachovia, I had the privilege of attending a Stephen Covey's First Things First seminar. And it wasn't the whole 7 habits. It was just the first 3 habits called First Things First. And one of the exercises they take you through is bring in your calendar, look at the last 2 weeks of your calendar, and then you put them into the 4 quadrants. And you start to very quickly realize, am I doing things that are urgent or am I doing things that are important? And they taught in that seminar, how do you prioritize and how do you build your calendar such that your calendar reflects your priorities and your values? And that was probably 25 years ago. And I can tell you, I still use that exact same thought process today as I build out my calendar, as I build out my priorities and strategies.
So how do you check yourself on that? Do you go back every so often and make sure that like you're not veering off course? You know what I mean? Like a personal check-in almost, or
and it's easy to do.
We all get bogged down by the day to day, right? So
my executive assistant often tells me, because one of the things I do in my Outlook calendar now, I use the same principle, but I color code everything. So everything on my calendar is color coded. So if I've got meetings with my direct reports, it's in green. If I've got meetings with my board of directors, it's in orange. And so we'll go back periodically over the last, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Hey, let's look at the calendar. Let's see how we're doing. What percent of my time was spent on things that are green, which are people that report to me and rely on me for leadership, and how much of my time was spent on other things. So I do that periodically to make sure that I've still got the right balance that I want to have.
I'd love to talk to you, and I think this ties right into it as you're talking about your team and your direct reports. You've been at Partners now for, some time, so you got to know the team there. I'm sure you've added and subtracted to your team as well. This question is really about building a leadership team. We all talk about culture a lot, but I kind of like to take it back a step even. When you're building the team, when you're looking at your team, what are you trying to find in like a senior leader to join the team? Is there characteristics you look for, and like really what plays into that decision-making process to add such a core member to your group?
Yeah, and it's probably the most important decision that a leader can make, and that is deciding who's going to be on the leadership team. And I've done it now at 3 different companies and had some success with it. And I have a very regimented, detailed process. And the first thing that I think is to thine own self be true. So you have to be very honest with yourself as a leader as to, what are the things I'm good at? What are the things I want to spend my time on? And what are the things that I will not spend my time on? So then I start to look at filling in those pieces and those blocks. And step number 1, who on the executive leadership team do I need to re-recruit so that they stay? Because everybody's got choices. And then who do I need to engage with so that I find out exactly where are the parts that I need to fill in and complete? So when I go through the selection process and go through the process of interviewing folks, it normally comes down to 2 critical decisions that I ask myself when I get to the point about, am I going to hire this person or not? And the question number 1 is this person smarter than me? I want people on my team that are smarter than I am. I already know what I know. I already know what I think.
Right.
I want somebody on my team that's smarter than I am. And number 2, is this person someone that I could see one day if I reported to them, I'd be excited about? And if the answer to both of those questions has to be yes, because then I can say yes. Now I'm excited about having that person join my team.
I've heard that in a different way before, that idea of like, would you want to work for them? So let's look at the flip side of that. Is there something in that interview process when you're getting to know them that you're like, no, that's it. Nope, that's not going to fit here or work here.
Yeah.
Is there that turn off, right?
Yeah. And again, I think one of the mistakes that leaders typically make, especially more inexperienced leaders typically make, is they connect with a personality versus a substance. And this is not a personality competition. Hey, I like this person. We both play golf, or we both like the symphony, or we both like certain things. So I think they'll be a great person on my team. that has as close to zero to do with whether they're going to be effective in the job as possible. So it's not a personality contest. It's more of a right fit type of contest, which is, does this person fit the culture of the organization that I am trying to build and aspire to? And if not, and I've had a couple of folks since I've come into the credit union world that have reached out and said, gosh, I'd love to come work with you again. And it's like, hey, I love you to death as a salesperson. I would never hire you to be in my company, and I think you have to be that honest with folks to say, hey, based on what you're trying to build. So that, the turnoff for me, it's really someone who can't be sincere, can't be humble, can't be authentic about the things that they've done. One of the questions I often ask in interviews, they tell me about the biggest mistake you ever made and what you learned from it. And are you self-aware enough to be able to talk about, hey, here's my failures. Here's where I made mistakes that I wish I had to do over, but not that I get to do over, but I do get to learn from those mistakes.
I used to ask that question on the podcast in like the first season, and I don't know why I got away from it. That's so funny because there were always some good stories. Most people that are in the CEO chair remember a pretty big mistake they made along that career journey, right? So
absolutely.
I do have a question. Now that you've built the team, right? Like, how do you give feedback? And could you give an example? We don't need to mention anybody's name, somebody who screwed up or disappointed you, you know what I mean? But like, how did you give feedback? How did it turn out? How do you keep everybody moving in the same direction?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and that is establishing the right behaviors and expectations are so important. And I share that with my team up front. Hey, when someone is giving you feedback, and there's only two types of feedback, then they're investing in you. And the two types of feedback is feedback to make you glow, and everybody loves that. Hey, you did great at this, you did great at that. That's all good and well, but there's very little growth in that. That feels good for about 30 seconds, and then you move on to the next thing. But the real growth feedback is feedback to make you grow, which is, hey, I'd like to have seen you do this. Basically, what I saw was this. So we use a format called situation, behavior, and impact, which is to be very specific. So I'll give you a prime example of one I did this morning with an executive. Hey, let me give you the situation. I have the opportunity to observe you in this particular meeting, and you were very prepared, you were very focused. But what I also saw in your behavior is that you were so focused on getting through your material, you didn't watch the room. You didn't see that you were losing people along the way. And the impact on me of seeing that is that I think you're going to have some follow-up work to do. So there are two people in that room that you didn't connect with, so I don't think they're on board. They shook their heads saying they were on board, but I don't think they were on board. So the next step for you is say, how are you going to go back and circle back and make sure that you spend time connecting with those folks as you're doing your presentation?
So often, and you talked about in the very beginning, what has you excited about credit unions is kind of that, the opportunity that's out there. We're seeing there's digital transformation is almost an overused phrase at this point, right? But so when you come in and you've got, a kind of a direction, a strategic plan that you want to institute for the credit union, and I'm sure, you've worked with it on your board and maybe some outside folks to help, but how do you get the buy-in from your team to make sure everybody's, kind of paddling in the same direction? Any hacks that you've picked up over your career?
Yeah, and there's no shortcuts. That's the first thing I would tell folks is that, I've built strategic plans now for most of my career. I've done it at several companies, and I could have come in here at Partners and said, hey, here's the plan. We're going to go do it. Everybody get in line, march with me. We're going that way. That just doesn't work. We were very deliberate here at Partners of saying it's going to be a ground up strategy. And that is, let's engage every employee. Let's have a lot of conversations about where are we going, why are we going there, and how do we get there? So that folks have a chance at each step of the way to participate and to sign on. Hey, yes, I understand why we're doing this. Okay, yes, now I understand how we're going to do this. Yes, now I understand what my role is in doing this. And that's where the connection and a lot of strategic plans, they become great binders and they sit on the shelf. And that's because the leadership has not connected each individual with what's in it for you. This is why you ought to connect to this, and this is what's going to be good for you and for the membership if you connect to this particular strategic plan.
Let me ask you this. One of the interesting things as I've had friends who have become CEOs over the years, that a lot of the times, let's just say maybe the part that they were, I want to say taken aback by, but they were like, I didn't realize maybe how much it was like the board relations. They were like, I had a great CEO. I went to all the board meetings, but I didn't realize all the stuff that goes on day to day there. And a question that I found interesting, because when you're kind of coming into that situation, and I'm sure a lot of CEOs deal with this, but you may have that board member, or it could be another team member on your team, like another senior leader on the team, who kind of has the idea that their way is the right way. It's always the right way. Any ways, I'm sure you've had to deal with this in your career, where to bring them along, to see the whole team version. It's not just their way or the highway, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is role clarity and level setting of expectations. So clearly, there is no relationship like that between a CEO and their board. There's nothing, having been the number two guy for 7 years, I thought I was completely prepared for it. I'll tell you, there's nothing that prepares you for being in that seat until you're in that seat.
I've heard that over and over again. Yep.
Yeah, the relationship is so different. And it really does have to be an individual relationship, I think, that the CEO tries to build with each individual board members and then with the collective as a whole. But to your question, how do you deal with either that coworker or to a board member that thinks their way is always right? I think I always go back to the protocols and the role of clarity. So I always share with my team, hey, guys, we don't, we will have a lot of collaboration. Everybody gets a voice. Everybody doesn't get a vote. So once you've had your chance to voice your opinion, I'm the only one that votes. And so that we're clear, that's just how we're going to get things done. And I think the same relationship has to exist with the board, which is, hey, let's have role clarity. And my job is to, I always think if a board member is adamant that their way is the right way and that the way I'm going is wrong, I take the ownership on me to say, okay, what have I not done a good job and an effective job of explaining such that there's still some misunderstanding or clarity of information. So I take that as a great opportunity that someone is that engaged that they want to have further discussion.
From our couple of conversations, I find it seems like you're pretty progressive as far as like what your view of the credit union can be, right? And the movement as a whole. And it kind of goes back to some of the things that you've already been talking about here, but it's one of these flip side questions that I love to ask and that I know I struggled with. I have a laundry list of these, but that idea that you knew was going to be a good one, right? Like you had to do it, and then you realize it's not. And that idea of not getting married to the idea to kill a project sometimes that you've invested a lot of, could be money, could be time. Any hacks there? I think for, leaders, it's sometimes one of the toughest thing to learn is that sometimes killing a project is the best thing you can do, right? So
it really is. And one of the best things you can do as a leader, I think, in building credibility is being confident enough in yourself to be able to say, you know what, guys, I was wrong. This is not the way we ought to go. And I have had to do that. And I tell people most of the times, I probably make mistakes every single day. I mean, fortunately, I've got smart people around me that are asking enough questions, that we're debating things enough to where I don't make those same mistakes over and over again. But I do think it's very important that a leader be able to look in the mirror and say, I went left, I should have gone right. I have to own that mistake. So now how do we go fix it? Because I think that only builds credibility. And then what it does, it gives other people on the team permission to own their mistakes and say, hey, nobody's going to get taken out to the woodshed because you made a mistake, but let's fix it. Let's own it together.
That was the question that was kind of popping into my head as you were talking there, was that idea of, sometimes when we do make a mistake, we maybe get a little bit gun shy. And the other side of that is, I think as organizations, as credit unions get bigger, sometimes we move a little slower. It's a little tougher to turn the ship. How do you make sure that not only yourself and the credit union, but your team is still taking those new risks, that you keep innovating so that you can keep moving the credit union forward? Because as we've seen over the past few years, nothing's standing still, right? So
absolutely. I see a lot of organizations, especially after you've made a mistake, then all of a sudden every decision has to be made by committee. So that if the committee says yes, then nobody, if we're all responsible, then nobody's responsible. And I would just say, that you've got to be willing to get out there and go forward and not worry about yesterday's mistakes. We're going to make mistakes every single day. There's not a single mistake we make in this business that we can't fix. But I'd much rather make mistakes leaning forward than making mistakes of trying to play catch up on things that we didn't decide. I share with my team all the time, hey, everybody who needs to be involved in this decision is probably sitting around this table. So if we become too bureaucratic, we're going to lose the competitive advantage that we have as an industry because we should be able to make decisions pretty quickly.
Okay, this kind of, I'm tying a question that I had for you with another one kind of together here, but like that idea of what the future of work looks like. You're talking about people being around the table. Was I correct? You're both in Florida and California? I mean, as far as the credit union goes, what does the virtual table look like? And any thoughts on what, I'm sure you grew up in financial services just like I did. There was one thing that financial services thought could never happen, and it was remote work. I remember early on starting off at Morgan Stanley, and they were like, no, you're at your desk 100 hours a day.
As you know, that's a belief that's dying really, really slow in our industry too. There are still those that still believe that.
My understanding from, some friends that I've talked to is, if you're in, say, a part of the country that maybe isn't as desirable, all of a sudden you have your entire, like that talent pool opens up. Let's just say if people don't necessarily have to move to, and I'm not going to name any place, but, everybody listens. We love them all. So what does credit unions, like a career in credit unions look like to you if you're, kind of breaking out that crystal ball? And then any hacks that, having people on both sides of the country, my guess is you'll always have to bring people together virtually.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So I think it certainly taught us a lot over the last 2 years that, the beliefs we had about, this job absolutely has to be full-time on site. You can't do this job remote. I mean, we had some of our best lending months when I was at my previous shop during the pandemic, and we had every single underwriter, loan processor was remote. We were doing everything remote. So the idea that any job has to be 100% on site, I think I would challenge that ethos and challenge people to really think through it. I think you just have to be open to flexibility and change. So we have our East Coast operation or West Coast operation. And our motto is that you get the same level of service regardless of what coast you work on and what time of the day you're doing business. So now as leaders, that requires that, hey, our first meeting on some days start at 10 a.m. so that we can have our West Coast partners start at 7 or 8. And sometimes meetings go till 6 p.m. so that our West Coast partners can join us late in the afternoon. So that's just part of what you do. Technology has afforded us a lot of opportunities and freedoms, So one person made a comment about Zoom and about all the remote working. So, the good thing about people being remote, everybody's square on the screen is the same size. So you don't get a bigger square on the screen based on your title. Everybody gets the same size square on the screen. So I just think you have to have certain protocols. Hey, everybody leaves the camera on, nobody gets to opt out and, you come and go as you want to. So just a lot of protocols I think you have to set up in place.
I guess if you're looking forward, and, you mentioned earlier in the conversation that idea of making credit unions desirable for that next generation, as far as the growth. Any thoughts the same to make us maybe more desirable as an employer of choice as well? Like you, once I got into credit unions, I didn't want to leave. You know what I mean? And I think that credit unions suck us in once we get here, right? Like,
that's exactly right.
How do we get the best and the brightest to want to come work for us as well, right?
I think we do and I shared this at our CEO Summit last month. I think we do probably one of the worst jobs in the industry of telling our story because we have got a great story to tell and we ought to be very proud of it. It's not bragging, it's just stating the facts. I think the credit union movement is so powerful. And there's a place for the 25, 30-year-old who's starting their career. There's a place for them in this industry. I think the remote work is a great, great benefit for us. I read an article last week talking about the resurgence of remote living in some rural communities because folks can now live in rural communities and still work at any job that they want to. And I think that's a phenomenon that's going to play out in a lot of industries. And we just hired a product development specialist who lives in Pittsburgh. The last time I checked, we don't have operations in Pittsburgh, but this person is going to be very effective for us and can add a lot of value for us. And so I think we just need to keep opening our minds to what that looks like and how that feels going forward.
Absolutely. Okay. So I want to be respectful of your time, but it would not be the CUInsight experience without some rapid fire questions. So we're going to have a little fun with you. The questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. So, okay. All right. So when was the last time that you were amazed? Something just amazed you?
Oh, wow. I would say that was last week. My goddaughter was visiting with all her kids, and I was amazed at how teenagers can just totally entertain themselves with nothing but each other. It was wonderful to see.
That's fantastic. I thought you were going to say with their devices. So they actually played together
too.
as teenagers.
That too. Yeah.
So, I found myself and others that I've talked to, when leading an organization, it can often consume us. And often that's to the detriment of some personal relationships. What is it that you've lived and learned along the way to create some, I'll use the word balance in life? Any hacks you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough. I married my high school sweetheart, and she and I will celebrate 27 years this year.
Congratulations. That's
Thank
amazing.
you. I found out during COVID that we really do like each other because we were locked in the house together for 2 years. And it was the most fun we probably had in most of our lives together. So we really like each other.
Jill and I have talked about that often, because we traveled so much for work beforehand, our entire relationship. And all of a sudden in COVID, we were locked down and we're like, holy smokes, we actually like each other a lot, but we felt maybe you and your wife probably talked about this. You're probably like, because we did, where we're like, boy, this would be horrible if people didn't.
Exactly.
During this, where you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. So, okay. So how do you get that balance?
Yeah. Well, one of the hacks I'll tell you that is that you do have to have outside interests. I'm an avid golfer, but I like to read. I used to be an extreme extrovert. I've morphed over the years to where I can't wait to get home and sit on the couch and just read a book. And I'm the old school. I like to actually flip the pages in the book. I don't want it on my iPad. I want to flip the pages. So having the balance and just having outside interest.
I am with you. Jill's moved over to the Kindle, and I still need a paper book.
Me too.
So I'm going to skip ahead to the question down, since you just talked about reading. Is there a book that you're really digging, you like right now, or really that book that you think everybody should read? Do you have a favorite?
And this is going to be a shameless plug, but I did read recently Bob Iger's book called The Ride of a Lifetime. Not because he's a Disney legend, but because he was such a great executive. And one of the things he actually said in the book, and he said in an interview later, is when folks were asking him, why did you decide to retire? This was his second or third attempt at it. And it was one of the best statements about EQ that I've ever heard. He said, I got to the point that I didn't feel like I was listening enough. And that's when I knew it was time to go. And I'm like, wow, think about that level of EQ. So that's definitely a book that I would highly encourage folks to read.
That's a good one. I've not read that, so you're adding to my list. That idea of listening more and talking less, right? That's a struggle for me. So is there a piece of advice, like that best piece of advice you ever received, and who gave it to you?
It's probably my father-in-law gave me a piece of advice early on, and he said, people, and this is not new, but he lived it. And that is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And to really spend time, being present with people. Everybody's important. Everybody's busy. But when you have the opportunity to be present with someone, truly be present, because they won't remember what you told them, but they will remember how you made them feel. And that's where being present, I think, makes all the difference in the world.
I love it. That's smart, man. This is a new question that I've just started to add, so I don't know if it's going to fly or not, but I was thinking about it because of myself in a conversation I was having. But is there anything that you're unreasonably either cheap or thrifty about?
Oh my gosh, I am cheap about everything. My wife would tell you it's about anything golf related. I'm very willing to pay for that, but I don't buy clothes for myself. I hate paying for sunglasses.
Awesome. So you pick them up at the conference, or
exactly. Yeah.
You love that JMFA has them on. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
I love it. Yeah. What's the greatest album of all time?
Oh, greatest album of all time.
Yeah, that one you can listen to front to back.
I will tell you, it's KC and the Sunshine Band.
Awesome. That might be the first time that's been mentioned on the show. So, I'll be honest. That was, that's fantastic. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind, and why?
My father. He passed away a couple years, probably 4 years ago now. He raised 7 kids. He was a factory worker and a Southern Baptist minister. At one point there was 9 of us living in the house. We never knew, or he never let us know how poor we were, because we never wanted for anything. And as we grew up, we had every opportunity we could have. He taught us, the value of hard work, but he also taught us the value of family and looking out for each other. So absolutely the person who taught me the most.
That is fantastic. Well, that is a perfect way to wrap it up. I do have one quick question. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a small town called Big Island, Virginia, which is neither an island nor big. It's outside of Lynchburg, Virginia, in the rural part of Virginia.
Oh, that's fantastic. The last question, I promise here, is any final thoughts that you'd like to share, or do you have any asks of our listeners today?
Yeah. I would say that it's been a pleasure spending time with you today. This has been absolutely great. I would say I wake up every day as the eternal optimist, believing that something good and great's going to happen. I just have to get out there and be a part of it. So I would encourage your listeners to do the same thing. Figure out today how you can help somebody, be positive to somebody. We've got so much negative in the world. We don't need any more of that. So what can you do today to be a positive influence to somebody?
Well, that is the perfect way to wrap this up. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ricky, for being on the show. I appreciate you taking the time and spending the time with me today. If people have additional questions of you, what's your poison? LinkedIn, email? How do you want people to hit you up?
Email is fine. LinkedIn is fine. But yeah, absolutely. You can email me at the office of the CEO at partnersfcu.org. Be glad to reach out anytime.
We will link to that and everything else we talked about in the show notes. Thank you again for being here. Before we go, make sure to check out Elan Credit Card in the show notes. Their digital technology, industry-leading rewards products, and commitment to credit unions make them a great partner for you and our show. I am grateful for their support to allow me to have this much fun doing what I do. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And if you're looking for a book, like the one Ricky mentioned, a quick Google search of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read is on its way from Amazon. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock. I appreciate the kind words that come in about the show. I hope you are all well, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon in person. Have a great day, everyone.